The wagon wheel gave out just as the sun began to sink behind the wide western horizon, and with it the last bit of hope he had been holding on to. The sharp crack of splintering wood echoed down the empty dirt road like a gunshot, and the wagon tilted hard to one side. Dust rose slowly around him, glowing gold in the fading light. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the broken wheel as if willing it to fix itself. But nothing in his life had fixed itself for a long time. He had lost everything before that will ever touch the ground. The farm was gone. The house with the white fence was no longer his. Even the small patch of land where his father used to sit in the evenings had been sold to settle debts that were not entirely his fault. A long drought, a failed harvest, and a handful of bad deals had stripped him down to little more than the clothes on his back in the wagon that now leaned helplessly in the middle of a forgotten western town. The town itself looked like something left behind by time. Wooden buildings lined both sides of the wide dirt street. Their paint had long since faded under years of sun and wind. A saloon door creaked in the breeze, though there was no music and no laughter inside. The general store sign swung slowly overhead, knocking against its chain. It was the kind of place people passed through on their way to somewhere better. No one planned to stay. He wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand and walked around the wagon. The wheel had split clean through the center. The iron rim hung crooked. There would be no traveling tonight, maybe not tomorrow either. He had been headed west with no clear plan except to keep moving. Now even that small plan had fallen apart. He crouched down and pressed his hands into the dirt, trying to steady himself. Losing the farm had been one thing. Watching strangers walk through his home had been another. But this felt different. This felt like the road itself was telling him he did not belong anywhere. A soft sound of footsteps reached him through the quiet. He looked up, expecting to see a passerby or maybe a child from one of the houses. Instead, he saw a woman walking toward him from the far end of the street. She wore a simple blue dress, the fabric plain but clean. Her sleeves were rolled slightly as if she had been working. She moved with purpose, not hesitation. He straightened slowly, unsure what to say. Folks in towns like this were not always eager to get involved in someone else's trouble. Help often came with a price. She stopped a few steps away and looked at the broken wheel. Her eyes were calm, steady, and far kinder than he expected. There was no judgment in them, only quiet understanding. "That's a bad break," she said, her voice low and even. He gave a short nod. "Seems that way." She stepped closer, kneeling down beside the wheel without waiting for permission. Her hands brushed the wood, testing its strength. "You won't be going anywhere with this like it is." He almost laughed at the obvious truth of it. "I figured as much." The wind picked up slightly, lifting a few loose strands of her hair. She did not seem bothered by the dust or the fading light. Instead, she looked at the wagon like it was a problem meant to be solved, not a sign of defeat. "There's a shed behind my place," she said after a moment. "My father used to fix wagons for travelers. I still have his tools. We might be able to mend this enough to hold." He blinked, surprised. "You'd do that for a stranger?" She met his eyes then, and for a brief second, something unspoken passed between them. "Everyone's a stranger until they're not," she replied. He had not heard words that gentle in a long time. The road had been lonely, the losses had been heavy. Trust felt like something he had packed away and forgotten. "I don't have much to offer in return," he admitted. "I didn't ask for anything," she said simply. Together they worked to lift the wagon slightly so the broken wheel could be removed. It was hard labor. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and deep red. His hands were rough and strong from years of farming, but he had not worked beside someone in months. The quiet rhythm of shared effort felt unfamiliar, almost comforting. She brought out a small wooden crate filled with tools that had seen better days. A hammer, spare nails, a few metal brackets. Nothing fancy, but enough to try. As she knelt in the dirt, tapping carefully at the split wood, he studied her without meaning to. There was determination in the way she moved, not rushed, not careless. She was used to fixing what she could instead of waiting for rescue. "You live here alone?" he asked. She paused only slightly. "My father passed 2 winters ago. It's just me now," he nodded, understanding more than he wished to. "I'm sorry," she gave a faint smile. Life doesn't stop for sorrow. There's always something that needs doing. He thought about the fields back home, about how he had tried to fight the drought with stubborn pride. Maybe he should have asked for help sooner. Maybe he should have let someone stand beside him instead of carrying every burden alone. The sound of metal striking wood echoed softly as she secured the bracket over the crack. He held the wheel steady while she worked. Their hands brushed once by accident. Neither of them pulled away quickly. The town grew quieter as evening settled in. A lantern flickered to life inside one of the distant buildings. Somewhere a horse snorted from a nearby stable. The air cooled, carrying the scent of dry earth. "You were heading west?" she asked after a while. "Yes, looking for something?" He hesitated. The truth felt heavier than the wagon itself. "I thought maybe I could start again, somewhere new. Somewhere the past doesn't follow so closely." She tightened one last nail and sat back on her heels. "The past has long legs," she said gently. "It catches up if you run too fast." He let out a slow breath. "I've been running a long time." She looked at him then, really looked at him, as if measuring the weight he carried. Maybe stopping isn't always losing. Those words settled deep inside him. They lifted the wheel back into place carefully. He tightened the bolts as best he could. It was not perfect, but it might hold for a while. Long enough to reach the next town at least. He stood and wiped his hands on his worn trousers. "I don't know how to thank you." She rose as well, brushing dust from her skirt. "You can start by not leaving tonight. It's too dark to travel safely. There's a small room in my house. You can rest and head out in the morning." The offer hung in the air between them. He glanced down the empty road, then back at her. He had planned to keep moving no matter what. That had been the only rule he followed since losing everything. Do not stay. Do not get attached. Do not risk losing again. Yet standing there in the soft glow of evening, with the wagon upright and the town quiet around them, leaving felt harder than staying. "I don't want to be a burden," he said. "You're not," she replied firmly. For the first time in months, he felt something shift inside his chest, not hope exactly. Something quieter, something steady. They walked toward her small house at the edge of town. A thin line of smoke rose from its chimney. The porch boards creaked under their steps. She opened the door and motioned for him to enter. Inside, the room was simple but warm. A wooden table stood near the window. A quilt was folded neatly over the back of a chair. There were signs of careful living, of someone making the most of what little they had. She lit another lantern and the soft light filled the space. He removed his hat, unsure of where to stand. He had not been welcomed into a home since losing his own. "You can sit," she said, placing the tools back into a corner. "I'll make some supper." As she moved about the small kitchen area, he watched quietly. The simple sound of water pouring into a pot, of bread being sliced, of plates set on a table felt almost unreal. He had grown used to cold meals eaten alone by a campfire. He wondered what had brought her to stay in a town others had left behind. He wondered why she had chosen to help him without question. And somewhere in those thoughts, a small spark began to grow. When she placed the food before him, their hands met again briefly. This time neither pretended not to notice. Outside, the wind began to rise. It carried a distant rumble that did not sound like thunder. He turned his head slightly, listening. She noticed the change in his expression. "What is it?" He stood and stepped toward the window. In the far distance, a faint cloud of dust moved along the road. Too large to be natural, too steady to be the wind alone. His heart tightened. He knew that shape, that slow gathering of riders. He had seen it before, back when the farm was slipping from his hands and men came with papers and hard faces. The past had long legs after all. He swallowed, the warmth of the small house suddenly feeling fragile. "I think," he said quietly, "my troubles may have found me." She stepped beside him, looking out into the darkening horizon. The dust cloud grew clearer with each passing second. Neither of them spoke. And as the first distant hoofbeats reached the edge of town, he realized that fixing a broken wagon had been the easy part. The harder part was deciding whether to keep running or finally stand his ground, especially now that staying meant risking not just his own heart, but hers too. The sound of hoofbeats rolled closer, steady and unhurried, like men who knew they would not be denied. He stayed by the window, his jaw tight, his hands resting against the wooden frame. The dust cloud grew thicker at the edge of town, drifting past the first row of empty storefronts. She stood beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her shoulder through the thin fabric of her dress. "Are they coming for you?" she asked quietly. He did not answer right away. His mind had already gone back to the day everything changed. The day 2 riders had appeared at his farm with folded papers and polite voices that carried sharp edges underneath. "I don't know for certain," he said at last, "but I have a strong feeling." The riders entered the main street without slowing. There were 4 of them now, their horses tall and well kept. They did not look like travelers passing through. They looked like men with purpose. She stepped back from the window. "You can leave through the back? There's a trail behind my house that leads to the dry creek bed. If you ride hard enough, they won't catch you tonight." He turned to face her. The thought of running again stirred something bitter inside him. He had been running from debt, from shame, from memories. But standing here in her small home, with lantern light casting soft shadows on the walls, running felt different. "I'm tired of riding away," he said. Her eyes searched his face. Tired doesn't mean safe. He knew she was right. Safety had been a luxury he lost long ago, but there was also something else at stake now. If those men were indeed looking for him, their presence here could bring trouble to her doorstep. He walked to the small table and picked up his hat. "I won't bring trouble into your home. If they are here for me, I'll meet them outside." She moved quickly, blocking the door before he could reach it. "This is my home," she said, her voice firm in a way he had not heard before. "And no one steps onto this porch unless I allow it?" He stared at her, surprised by the fire in her tone. She was not reckless, she was steady. There was a difference. "You don't even know what this is about," he said gently. "Then tell me," she replied. Outside, the horses slowed. He could hear the leather saddles creak, the quiet murmur of men speaking to one another. The town had gone still, as if every building was holding its breath. He drew in a long breath. "The farm had been in my family for years. When the drought hit, I borrowed money to keep things going. I believed the rain would come back. It always had before." "And it didn't," she said softly. "No, the crops failed twice. The bank grew impatient. I tried to negotiate, but they sent collectors instead. Men who didn't care about history or memories. Only numbers." She listened without interrupting, her hands folded in front of her. "I signed papers I barely had time to read. They took the land, sighed I still owed a balance. Claimed I'd misreported part of the harvest to buy more time. I swear to you I did not lie. But once they decide you've cheated them, the truth doesn't matter." Her brow furrowed. "So they might think you owe more. More than I could ever pay." A heavy knock struck the front door, cutting through the quiet like a blade. Both of them flinched. Another knock followed, slower this time, deliberate. She lifted her chin and stepped forward. "Stay back," she whispered. Before he could argue, she opened the door just enough to see outside. Lantern light from inside spilled onto the porch, revealing 4 men seated on horseback. Their coats were clean despite the long ride. One of them leaned slightly forward in his saddle, studying her. "Evening, ma'am," the lead rider said. His voice carried a smooth politeness that did not reach his eyes. "We're looking for a man traveling with a damaged wagon. Came through here not long ago." She did not glance behind her. "Lots of travelers pass through. This one stands taller than most. Looks like he's had a hard season." She met the man's gaze without lowering hers. "Hard seasons are common out here." A faint smile tugged at the corner of the rider's mouth. "Mind if we take a look around?" "This is private property," she said evenly. "You'll have to state your business more clearly." Inside, he felt both pride and fear rising together. She was protecting him without hesitation. That kind of loyalty could come at a cost. The rider shifted in his saddle. "Our business is lawful. We represent the bank that recently acquired land east of here. The former owner failed to settle his remaining debt. We believe he may be attempting to avoid collection." She nodded slowly, as if considering his words. "And if you find him?" "We ask him to return with us peacefully." The silence that followed was thick. Even the horses seemed to sense the tension. She opened the door a little wider and stepped onto the porch, closing it gently behind her. He could no longer see her face, only hear the exchange. "There's a wagon in the street with a broken wheel," she said. "If that's your man, he won't be traveling far tonight." His heart skipped. She had not lied, but she had not fully told the truth either. The men turned in their saddles toward the road. One of them chuckled softly. "Well, that makes things easier." Boots hit the dirt as they dismounted. He knew he could not hide in her small house forever. Taking a steadying breath, he opened the door and stepped onto the porch beside her. All four men looked at him at once. "There he is," the lead rider said. He walked down the porch steps slowly, keeping his hands visible. "You found me." The man studied him carefully. "You were instructed to remain within the county until your balance was settled." "I received no such instruction," he replied calmly. "You signed a document acknowledging further review of your accounts." "I signed what you put in front of me under pressure." The rider's expression cooled. "Careful. That sounds like an accusation." "It's a statement." She stood behind him on the porch, silent but present. He could feel her eyes on his back. "We're not here for arguments," the rider said. "You owe money. The bank wants assurance that you'll pay. I have nothing left to give." "Then you'll come with us until arrangements are made?" The words hung heavy in the air. He glanced back at her for a brief second. The lantern light framed her face, revealing worry she was trying to hide. "I'll need my wagon repaired fully before traveling," he said, buying time. The rider looked toward the crooked wheel in the street. "That patch won't hold long. It will hold enough," he answered. One of the other men stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You could have stayed and worked off the debt. Instead you rode off?" "They left me no work to do," he replied. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of dry dust once more. Somewhere in the distance, a door creaked open and shut. The rest of the town was watching, even if from behind closed curtains. The lead rider removed a folded paper from his coat and held it up. "This is the claim. We are authorized to escort you back." She descended the steps then, standing beside him rather than behind. "He has done nothing violent," she said clearly. "Dragging him off in the night will only stir trouble." The rider raised an eyebrow. "And you are?" "A citizen of this town. That does not concern you." "It concerns me if you bring unrest to my doorstep." For a moment the rider seemed to weigh his options. 4 men against one weary traveler and a woman who refused to back down. Yet there was something else in the air now. A quiet resistance that did not rely on force. "We'll give you until morning," the rider said finally. "At sunrise we expect you ready to ride." He nodded once. "I'll be ready." The men returned to their horses but did not leave town. Instead, they tethered them near the saloon and disappeared inside, lantern light flickering through the windows. He exhaled slowly, tension easing only slightly. She turned to him. "You cannot trust them. I know. They will not let this go easily. I know that too." They stood in the dim light, facing each other as the town settled into uneasy silence. "Why didn't you take the trail?" she asked quietly. He looked toward the dark stretch of land behind her house. Freedom lay that way, uncertain but open. "Because I am done running," he said. "And because leaving would mean putting you at risk anyway? They would search." She studied him for a long moment. "Then we face morning together." The word together settled between them like a promise neither had spoken aloud. Inside the house once more the warmth felt different. The small space no longer seemed only a shelter. It felt like a stand being taken. He sat at the table, staring at his hands. "I never meant to drag anyone else into my troubles." "You didn't drag me," she said softly. "I stepped in." He looked up at her, truly seeing her strength. She had lost her father. She had kept his tools. She had stayed in a town others abandoned. She understood loss more than he realized. Outside, the murmur of voices drifted faintly from the saloon. The men were waiting, confident that dawn would settle things. But as the night deepened and the lantern burned low, he began to sense that the morning would bring more than a simple ride back. There were questions about the debt, about the papers, about what truly happened to his farm. And somewhere beneath it all was a growing bond neither of them expected. When the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, he rose from his chair. The riders would return soon. He stepped onto the porch and looked down the empty street. What he saw made his heart pound harder than before. The broken wagon was no longer alone. Several townsfolk stood near it, quiet but steady as if they had made a decision during the night. And in the distance, the riders were already approaching. The sky was pale gray when the riders stepped out of the saloon, their boots heavy against the wooden porch. The early light stretched long shadows across the dirt street. He stood at the edge of the porch, hat in hand, watching as more townsfolk gathered near the broken wagon. Some were older men with weathered faces. A few were women who had tied aprons over their dresses before stepping outside. No one spoke loudly, yet their presence said enough. She came to stand beside him, her shoulder brushing his arm. "They did not sleep much," she whispered. "News travels quickly in a small town?" He swallowed. "I never asked for this. You did not have to." The lead rider adjusted his coat as he walked forward. His eyes flicked toward the group around the wagon, then back to him. There was no smile this time. "Seems you've made friends overnight," the rider said. "I didn't ask anyone to gather," he replied. One of the older townsmen stepped forward, leaning on a cane. "We gather when something feels wrong," he said evenly. "And dragging a man away at sunrise feels wrong." The rider gave a polite nod that did not hide his irritation. "This is lawful business. The bank has authority." Another voice rose from the crowd. "Authority does not mean fairness." The word fairness hung in the cool air. He felt the weight of every eye on him. Part of him wanted to wave them away, to tell them this was not their fight. But another part understood that this was not only about him anymore. Many of these people had struggled through the same drought, the same hard seasons. They had seen neighbors lose land. They had signed papers they barely understood. The writer unfolded the document again. "This man owes a debt." He agreed to settle it. He stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "I agreed to review it. I asked for time. Instead, you sent collectors and claimed I misreported my harvest. You did not declare the final shipment. I never received payment for that shipment." The buyer backed out. The writer's jaw tightened. "Convenient." The tension grew thicker. She moved down from the porch and joined him near the wagon. "If there is a dispute," she said calmly, "then it should be settled with records, not threats." "There are records," the writer replied. "Signed and sealed." He looked toward the crowd. "I never saw the final accounting. They rushed me. Told me the numbers were fixed." A younger man from the town spoke up. "That happened to my brother last year." Claimed he owed extra fees after the sale. The writer's eyes narrowed slightly. "Be careful with your accusations." But doubt had already started to spread among the townsfolk. It was subtle, like a shift in the wind, but it was there. He felt a strange mix of fear and strength rising in his chest. Fear because the writers were not men who liked being challenged. Strength because he was no longer standing alone. She reached down and touched the wagon wheel. "This was repaired with my father's tools," she said. He kept records for every traveler he helped. Names, dates, small notes about their journeys. He believed in keeping things clear. The writer looked at her sharply. "And what does that have to do with this?" "It means we value proof here." He watched her carefully. There was something forming in her mind. Something more than simple defiance. The lead rider stepped closer to him, lowering his voice so only he could hear. "You are making this harder than it needs to be. Come quietly. We will review the numbers. If you are right, you will walk free, and if I am not?" He asked. "You will work off what you owe." Work off. The phrase felt heavy. He had heard stories of men sent to distant ranches under strict supervision, their labor counted against debts that never seemed to shrink. Behind them, the town's blacksmith moved toward the wagon and ran his hand along the repaired wheel. "This will not hold long on rough ground," he said. "He will not make it far if he rides hard." The rider turned to him. "Then perhaps that is reason enough to leave now." She looked from the blacksmith to the riders. "If he leaves, someone from this town rides with him." "To witness what happens." The suggestion caught everyone off guard. The rider gave a short laugh. "This is not a parade. It is accountability," she replied. He felt a rush of gratitude toward her, mixed with concern. She was pushing harder than anyone else. And pushing men like these could lead to consequences. The older man with the cane stepped forward again. "We've seen too many neighbors disappear under similar claims," he said. "We won't stand by quietly." The rider studied the crowd more carefully now. The town was small, but there were enough of them to make things complicated. The riders were armed, but so were some of the townsmen, though no one had drawn anything. The tension rested in the space between words, not actions. The rider folded the paper slowly. Very well. If you doubt the claim, we can review it here, but understand this. If the numbers stand, he rides with us today. A murmur passed through the crowd. He felt his pulse quicken. Reviewing the numbers meant opening old wounds. It meant trusting that the truth had not been altered in his absence. She spoke before he could. Bring the document to the general store. There is a large table inside. We will read every line. The rider hesitated, then nodded once. An hour. As the riders moved toward the store, the townsfolk began to follow, the dirt street filled with quiet determination. He remained still for a moment, staring at the wagon. She touched his arm gently. This is your chance, or my end, he said. Truth is not an end, she replied. It is a beginning. Inside the general store, sunlight filtered through dusty windows. The long wooden table bore scratches from years of use. The rider spread the document across it, smoothing the edges with deliberate care. Several townsmen gathered close. The store owner adjusted his spectacles and leaned in. He stepped forward, heart pounding. The document listed figures he recognized, but there were additions he had never seen. Extra fees for storage. Penalties for delayed reporting. Charges tied to market shifts he could not control. These numbers were not on the first statement, he said, pointing to a line near the bottom. They were added after review, the rider replied. After you took the land, he answered. The store owner cleared his throat. There is no signature beside these adjustments. The rider's eyes flicked toward the blank space. The original agreement allows for revisions, but it states the debtor must be notified, the store owner said quietly. The room grew silent. She stood slightly behind him, reading carefully. Was he notified? The rider did not respond immediately. One of the other men shifted uneasily. He felt the tension tightening again. If the riders had overstepped, admitting it would weaken their authority? If they denied it, the town would have to decide whether to trust the paper or the man standing before them. Outside, more people gathered near the doorway, straining to hear. I was not notified, he said firmly. I left because I believed the land was taken in full settlement. You left before the final review, the rider countered. I left because your men gave me no choice. The argument circled, neither side yielding. She stepped closer to the table and traced a finger along the ink. The handwriting changes here, she observed. This portion was written by someone else. The rider's gaze hardened. Are you accusing us of forgery? I am asking a question. The store owner leaned closer. It does appear different. A low murmur spread through the room. He felt both hope and dread rising together. If the document was flawed, he might have grounds to resist. But exposing that flaw could turn the riders from collectors into enemies. The lead rider straightened. Enough. We will not stand here being judged by townsfolk with no authority. And we will not hand over a man based on numbers we cannot trust. The older man with the cane replied. The air felt charged. He looked at her, searching for guidance. She met his gaze steadily. There was fear in her eyes now, but also resolve. Outside, a distant rumble echoed across the plain. Dark clouds were gathering on the horizon. A storm was moving in fast. The rider glanced toward the window. We do not have all day. No, she said quietly. We do not. The storm clouds grew darker, casting the town in shadow. The coming wind would make travel dangerous. If he rode out now, he would face not only uncertain judgment but harsh weather. The rider rolled up the document with a sharp motion. You have until the storm passes. Then we settle this. He knew that meant more than numbers on paper. It meant pressure, isolation, perhaps force if the town's unity wavered. As the rider stepped outside, the first strong gust of wind rattled the store windows. He turned to her, his voice low. If this turns worse, you must step back. I will not, she said. The storm was approaching quickly, dust swirling through the street. The wagon creaked as the wind tugged at it. He stepped out into the rising wind, watching the riders mount their horses once more. The conflict was no longer only about a broken wagon or a disputed debt. It was about power, truth, and whether a small western town could stand against something larger. And as thunder rolled in the distance, he realized the coming storm might test more than just the strength of his repaired wheel. The storm did not wait for anyone to finish their arguments. By mid-morning, the sky had turned the color of iron, and the wind tore down the main street like it meant to pull the town apart board by board. Dust swirled around the wagon, rattling its patched wheel. The riders had taken shelter inside the saloon again, but they had not left. Their horses were tied tight to the hitching post, restless under the rising thunder. He stood near the wagon, one hand gripping the side rail to steady it. The repaired wheel groaned each time the wind pushed against it. Across the street, she and a few townsfolk were fastening shutters, securing loose signs, doing what they could before the rain came. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew the storm was more than weather. It was a pause before something final. When the first drops of rain struck the dirt, they hit hard and fast. Within minutes, the street turned slick and dark. The general store owner rushed out with a canvas sheet to cover the wagon supplies. The blacksmith helped him tie it down, his strong hands moving quickly. "You should get inside," she called to him over the wind. He shook his head. "If they come out, I want to be here." The saloon doors swung open, slamming against the frame. The lead rider stepped out, his coat flapping in the gusts. The other three followed, hats pulled low. They did not look pleased. "This storm won't last forever," the rider shouted across the rain. "When it clears, we ride." The words felt like a clock ticking. He walked forward until he stood halfway between the wagon and the saloon. Rain soaked through his shirt, but he did not flinch. "We are still reviewing the claim," he said. "There is nothing left to review," the rider replied sharply. "You owe money." "That is fact." "Then show proof that I was notified of these added charges," he answered. Lightning cracked somewhere beyond the hills, close enough to make a few people jump. The townsfolk who had remained outside now formed a loose line near the boardwalk, not aggressive, just present. The rider stepped closer, rain running down his face. "You think hiding behind these people will save you?" "I am not hiding." The rider's gaze flicked toward her as she moved to stand at his side again. Even soaked and windblown, she did not look ready to step back. "This town has no authority over bank matters," the rider said. "Maybe not," she replied. "But we have a right to fairness." The storm intensified, rain coming down in heavy sheets. The dirt road turned to mud. Water pooled around the wagon wheels. The patched crack began to swell as the wood absorbed moisture. He noticed it at once. The blacksmith noticed too. "That wheel won't hold if it gets much wetter," he muttered. The rider followed their gaze. A slow realization spread across his face. "Looks like you won't be going anywhere after all." The implication hung heavy. If the wagon failed completely, he would have no means to leave even if he wanted to. He would be at the rider's mercy. She looked at the wheel, then at him. A decision was forming behind her eyes. "Bring it into my father's shed," she said suddenly. "We can brace it from the inside. Add another band of iron." The blacksmith nodded. "I have spare iron strips." "Not pretty, but strong." The rider stepped forward as if to object. "He does not get more time. He gets protection from the storm," she shot back. "You can stand here in the rain if you prefer." For a brief second, it seemed the rider might refuse just to prove control. But thunder rolled again, louder this time, and even his men shifted uneasily. "Fine," he said. "But we watch." Working against the storm was no easy task. Mud sucked at their boots as they pushed the wagon toward the shed behind her house. The wheel wobbled dangerously, each turn threatening to split it further. He felt the strain in his arms and back, but he did not let go. Inside the shed, the air smelled of old wood and oil. Tools lined the walls, carefully arranged. It felt like stepping into her father's memory. The blacksmith wasted no time, heating an iron strip in a small forge he had set up near the entrance. The rain pounded against the roof, turning the shed into a drum. The riders stood just outside, watching through the open doorway. Their presence was constant, like a shadow that refused to lift. She knelt beside the wheel again, hands steady despite the storm. "Hold it firm," she told him. He braced the wheel as the blacksmith pressed the heated iron against the wood. Steam hissed where metal met rain-soaked grain. The smell of scorched wood filled the air. "This will buy you distance," the blacksmith said. "Not forever. Forever is not what I need," he replied. He needed a chance, a fair hearing, a way to prove the numbers were wrong. As they worked, the rider stepped just inside the doorway. "You are delaying the inevitable," he met the man's gaze. "Oh, preparing for it," the rider's eyes shifted to her. "You are risking much for someone you met yesterday." She did not look up from her task. "Sometimes that is all it takes." He felt those words deeply. The iron strip was hammered into place, nails driven hard. The wheel looked rough, patched twice now, but stronger than before. The blacksmith wiped sweat and rain from his brow. "That is the best we can do," thunder boomed directly overhead, shaking the shed. For a moment, everyone fell silent. The rider stepped fully inside now, rain dripping from his coat. "Storm will pass by evening," he said. "Then we settle this once and for all. And how do you intend to settle it?" the older townsman asked from behind. The rider glanced around at the gathered faces. "With a final review and a signed agreement." "Or with custody." The word custody sent a chill through the room. He felt anger rising in his chest, but he kept his voice steady. "I will not sign anything I have not read clearly." "You will," the rider replied quietly, "if the alternative leaves you with nothing." He almost laughed at that. Nothing was a place he already knew too well. She stood and faced the rider directly. "If you are so certain of your claim, why not send for the bank manager himself? Let him answer questions." The rider's expression shifted slightly. "He is a busy man." "So are we," she said. The storm began to ease, the rain slowing to a steady patter. Light filtered faintly through the clouds. The rider stepped closer to him, lowering his voice so only they could hear. "This town cannot protect you forever. Even if you escape today, the debt follows. You cannot outrun it." "I am not trying to outrun it," he replied. "I am trying to face it honestly." The rider studied him for a long moment. There was something calculating in his gaze now, as if weighing not just numbers but influence. Outside, the rain thinned further. Townsfolk began stepping back into the open, assessing damage. The storm had left puddles and broken branches, but the buildings still stood. He looked at the reinforced wheel. It was ugly, scarred, but strong. In some way it mirrored him. The rider stepped back toward the doorway. "At sunset," he announced loudly, "we meet in the street. You will choose?" The word echoed in his mind. As the riders retreated to the saloon once more, the shed filled with low conversation. Some urged him to flee once the road dried. Others argued that standing firm was the only way to break the pattern of fear. She moved closer to him, her voice soft but urgent. "If you ride at dusk, the ground will still be soft. They cannot chase fast." "And leave you to answer for it?" he asked. "I can handle questions." He shook his head. "They will not stop with questions." Silence stretched between them. The air after the storm felt heavy but clear. He stepped outside, looking at the western horizon where the clouds were beginning to part. The setting sun would come soon, and with it the decision. The wagon stood ready, patched and braced. The town stood uncertain but united. The riders waited with papers and quiet threats. He felt the weight of everything pressing in, his lost farm, the disputed debt, the fragile trust of a town, the steady presence of the woman who had stepped into his life at the moment his wheel broke. As the sky slowly shifted from gray to gold, the riders emerged once more, forming a line in the middle of the street. The townsfolk gathered again, tension thick as rope pulled too tight. He walked toward the center, boots sinking slightly in the damp earth. She walked beside him. Sunlight broke through the clouds at last, casting a sharp glow over the wagon, the riders, and the faces of those who had chosen to stand there. The lead rider held out the folded document. "Time to decide," he said. And with the entire town watching, he reached for the paper, knowing that whatever happened next would change all of their lives. He took the folded document from the rider's hand, feeling the weight of more than just paper. The entire town seemed to lean in at once. The sunset cast a warm glow across the dirt street, lighting up the repaired wagon wheel and the tense faces around him. He unfolded the claim slowly and read it again, this time out loud so everyone could hear. Every original number. Every added charge, every penalty that had appeared without warning. The words sounded different when spoken into open air instead of whispered inside a bank office. When he reached the section where the extra fees had been written in a different hand, he paused. "These charges were added after the land was seized," he said clearly. "There's no signature beside them, no notice was delivered. That means the agreement was incomplete." A low murmur moved through the crowd. The store owner stepped forward with his spectacles perched low on his nose. "He is right," he said. "There is no confirmation of notification. That violates standard practice." The writer's jaw tightened. "Standard practice is not always written on paper, but agreements are," the older man with the cane replied firmly. The lead writer glanced at his men, then back at the townsfolk. The confidence he carried earlier had begun to thin. This was no longer a quiet collection. It had become a public dispute in the middle of a western town that was clearly paying attention. He looked directly at the writer. "I will honor any true debt I owe. I am not refusing responsibility. But I will not accept charges that were added without my knowledge." The writer folded his arms. "And how do you expect to settle what you admit you owe?" That question hung heavy. He drew in a slow breath. "The land is gone. I cannot bring that back, but I can work. I can haul freight, repair fences, help with harvest. I can earn an honest wage and pay down what was originally agreed upon." In writing, with witnesses, several townsfolk nodded at that. The blacksmith spoke up. "He has strong hands. I saw how he worked that wheel. He could take on jobs here until the balance is settled." A woman from the crowd added, "We need help before winter." He could earn his keep. The writer's gaze sharpened. "You would employ a debtor under dispute?" "We would employ a man willing to work," she answered. The silence stretched. The sun dipped lower, throwing long golden light across the scene. Dust still clung to boots from the storm, but the air had cleared. The writer stepped closer to him, lowering his voice. "You are fortunate. Not every town would stand for you." "I know," he replied. The writer studied the faces around him. There was no anger there, only resolve. These were not people looking for a fight. They were looking for fairness. Finally, the writer exhaled slowly. "The bank wants its money, not trouble. If the disputed charges are set aside pending review and you begin repayment immediately, we can draft a temporary agreement." A ripple of relief passed through the crowd, though no one celebrated yet. "With witnesses," she added firmly. "With witnesses," the writer agreed. The general store owner hurried inside and returned with ink and paper. The writer removed a pen from his coat. Right there in the middle of the street, under the fading western sky, they began writing a new agreement. This one listed only the original amount owed before the added penalties. It included a payment schedule based on labor and wages. It required monthly accounting with 2 town witnesses present. When the writer finished writing, he handed the paper to him. He read every word carefully. This time, no pressure. No rushed signature. The town stood around him like a quiet shield. He looked up at her. She gave a small nod. He signed his name. The writer added his own signature beneath it, followed by the store owner and the older man with the cane. The ink dried quickly in the warm air. The lead writer folded the new document and handed him a copy. "We will return in a month to review the first payment. You will find me here," he said. There was a long pause, then the writer gave a short nod. "See that we do." The riders mounted their horses. Without another word, they turned and rode out of town, their figures growing smaller against the wide horizon until they disappeared beyond the hills. For a moment, no one moved. Then the blacksmith clapped him on the shoulder. "You stood your ground," he said with quiet pride. The tension that had wrapped around his chest for days began to loosen. He let out a breath he felt like he had been holding since the day his farm was taken. The townsfolk slowly drifted back to their homes and shops. The street returned to its usual quiet, though something had shifted. There was a stronger sense of unity now, as if the town had remembered its own strength. He turned to her. The golden light of sunset caught in her hair, and for the first time since his wagon broke down, he allowed himself to truly smile. "I never expected any of this," he said. "Neither did I," she replied softly. They walked together toward the wagon. The reinforced wheel looked sturdy enough for now. The mud from the storm had begun to dry, leaving firm ground beneath. You could still leave, she said gently. The agreement allows you to travel if work calls elsewhere. He rested his hand on the side of the wagon. For days it had represented escape, movement, distance from loss. Now it felt different. I spent months chasing the idea of starting over somewhere new, he said. But maybe starting over does not always mean leaving. She looked at him carefully. What does it mean? It means building again. Right where you stand. The words felt simple, but they carried weight. They pushed the wagon back into the shed to protect it from the night air. The blacksmith promised to help strengthen the wheel further in the coming days. A few townsfolk offered him small jobs starting in the morning. Fence repairs, grain hauling, stable work. As the last of the sunlight faded, he found himself standing once more on her porch. The town was calm again. The saloon doors were closed. The sky stretched wide and peaceful above them. You could take the spare room again, she said. Until you find your footing, he met her eyes. I would like that. In the days that followed, he worked from sunrise to sunset. He repaired barn doors, hauled timber, mended tools. Each evening he brought his earnings to the general store, where the store owner carefully recorded every coin against the agreed balance. The riders did not return that month, nor the next. When they finally did, they found the payment steady and the town watchful. There were no hidden charges this time. No sudden revisions. The debt slowly shrank. More importantly, something else grew. They worked side by side often, whether fixing the wagon properly or tending the small garden behind her house. Laughter began to replace tension. Shared meals felt less like shelter and more like home. One evening, months after the storm, he stood in the shed looking at the wagon wheel. The iron bands were smooth now, reinforced properly. It was no longer a symbol of breaking down. It was a reminder of the day everything changed. She stepped inside quietly. Thinking about leaving? She asked. He shook his head. Thinking about how close I came to riding away from something good. She smiled softly. Broken things have a way of leading us where we need to be. He reached for her hand. I lost my farm. I lost my land. I thought I had lost my future. But losing everything forced me to stop long enough to find what truly mattered. And what is that? She asked, though her eyes already seemed to know, standing firm, being honest, and not facing hardship alone. Outside, the town moved through another calm western evening. The dirt street glowed under the setting sun. The general store sign creaked gently in the breeze. It was still a small place, still weathered by time, but it felt alive. He had come here with a broken wagon and a heart full of defeat. He had expected only another stop along a lonely road. Instead, he found fairness in the face of conflict. He found courage in a town that refused to look away. And he found love in the steady kindness of a woman who chose to help a stranger without asking for anything in return. The debt would one day be fully paid. The wagon would roll again when needed. But for now, he no longer felt the need to chase distant horizons. Sometimes the road breaks down to teach a man where he truly belongs. And in that quiet western town, beneath wide open skies, he finally understood that losing everything had led him to gain what mattered most.